Live.
Good morning. Welcome to Crosstalk at Eatonton First UMC. And we are here, myself and Joe DeLoach. I would call him Dr. Joe DeLoach.
Joe.
But I don't know that he's not really. Are you a doctor?
No.
You're not. You don't have like the doctorate title?
No,
or
doctor. No, just
teacher
plain old Joe
sometimes like
DeLoach.
Well, I like Joe. I like the name Joe. I like the title Mr. Joe or Mr. DeLoach or just Joe. And then myself, David Wofford, and Brian Beveridge. Do you like the title Dr. Beveridge?
No.
Okay.
I have a cousin that's a Dr. Beveridge, so no, there can't be two of us.
There's no Dr. Beveridge? All right.
Well, no, actually, I have a cousin that is a doctor. So there's a
Like
Dr.
a medical
Beveridge.
doctor.
Yeah, in Albany.
Okay.
When
So
you say that, my daughter-in-law is a doctor. So she's Dr. DeLoach, but she's
Right.
Doctor of Education.
well, I don't think there's any Dr. Woffords. So
They're just a college.
that's right. There is a college.
Forget the doctor.
But there's no medical school there. So anyway, welcome. Sorry, I have digressed, as they say. So today we're going to keep talking about those 5 points that we've been talking about for the last. Well, we just talked about it 1 week. So this week is our second week. We had talked about, and I have a list here I'll read from. Why are young people not attending church? And we talked about the first one, but I'll read them off to you because I think for the next few weeks it's good for us to just kind of talk about these things. Why are young people, and I guess young people, who would be young? Like under 40, under 50? Like what would you
I would
say?
say 50 and below.
Okay, so the baby,
Yeah.
the Generation X, the Millennials,
Right.
and then
Yeah.
whatever the next one's called.
Who comes after
The
the baby
Gen Z.
boomers?
Z, yeah.
Yeah.
Generation Z. So these are the 5. I've got them listed here. 5 points that have been made, and I think they're valid, and I think they're at least worthy of conversation. So we hope if you have any comments, please comment. Let us know if you have any questions. If you want to talk about things, we'd just love to hear from you if you're live. I see there's a few of you on already, and we thank you for being a part of this morning. So number 1, young people see church as irrelevant. We talked about this last week.
Mm-hmm.
They're tired of dealing with hypocritical leaders. They see many leaders as being moral failures. We talked about that 1 point. Now then the second point that we're going to talk about today is young people see God missing in churches, in today's churches. Number 3, young people see churches prohibiting legitimate doubt and questions. Number 4, young people see churches not teaching about God. And then number 5, young people see churches today not providing an opportunity to experience a sense of community. So the second point, we're going to talk about this today, and I hope that Joe, Dr. DeLoach, and Dr. Beveridge are ready to bring it in terms of conversation here. Young people see God missing in today's churches. Wow, how so they acknowledge God, but they don't see him here? Or they don't see him in church? Like in organized church, I guess?
They don't feel his presence.
Well, a lot of times, if you look at the way churches are structured and set up, they see it as an institution that's man-made, man-driven, man-centered, and not God-centered. Because a lot of churches believe you have to have the cross on the table that's gold. You have to have the bowls that are gold. You have to have these fancy chairs. You have to wear fancy clothes. You have to be fancy to come to church. You have to be cleaned up to come to church. It doesn't, show the essence of God wants you how you are. That broken down vessel that we are.
That's true. And see, for me, my age comes into play because if you look back on the history, Sunday was the day, well, everybody took a bath on Saturday night. So Sunday was the day you were clean and you dressed up. It was a sign of respect. When I came across, of course, we bathed every night, but I mean, Sunday, thank you. Sunday,
Thank you.
Sunday was, when you went to Sunday school or church, you were expected to dress a little different than if you were going to a ball game. And that's still, I'm still in there, but I've modified a little bit. Thank goodness my mother's not here. She would snatch a knot in me if she knew I went to church without socks on.
I do remember as a child. Well, first of all, my experiences. So the question of God in church, like I think, to mine down that sentence, young people see God missing. As a young person, I guess if we're under 50, if we're calling under 50 young, I guess
Oh, yeah.
I'm young. But I remember as a child going to church. I don't remember experiencing God in deep sort of profound ways. But I also remember seeing sort of the things happening on television. I mean, I hate to say it, but like Jerry Falwell, and not so much Jerry Falwell because he was really, as I remember, he was a really kind of
Yeah.
rules-based sort of Southern Baptist expression of faith. But I remember seeing some of those Pentecostal guys on like the Trinity Broadcasting Network, and like I'd see Benny Hinn, do some. It felt like magician. I was confused watching some of that stuff. I think we saw God-like things happening on TV. At least I did in the 80s, 1980s, or late 80s, really. And I went to church, and I didn't really experience. I didn't know what to experience, but I have had some pretty godly experiences, but not necessarily as a young person in church. Now, I have, as I've gotten older, I've had experiences. I have felt the presence of God in the church, and I have seen the love of God in people in church. I have seen God's love just pour out in fellowship and hospitality and caring for those who were mourning the loss of loved ones, or in a tragic moment, I've seen the church rise up. So as I've gotten older, I can't deny that I've experienced God's presence. But as a young person, I remember hearing the voices of my mother and father, who were very, they're not like this. This is not to say they're like this, but they would sort of simplify things that were happening around them. Like, Billy Bob's having an affair again. I heard those kind of conversations. And I'd go to church, and those people would be in church. Or I would see Billy Bob drive in a, back then, a $50,000 sports car. Oh, Billy or John the lawyer, look at that car he's got there. That kind of flashy stuff was happening. He'd show up. That guys,
Right.
some guys would show up in like $1,000 suits, and I was just doing good to have a button down, half shirt on.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just saying, like, so I saw a lot of the. I mean, I think we all do. I think it happens now, but like the flash and dash, the flashy stuff, the knowing people's moral failures in the small town that I grew up in, and the church was a hospital, and I didn't know it at the time. But I didn't see God in that. As a child, I didn't see God.
Well, on the other hand, you got like Joel Osteen that's got like 500,000 people that go to his church every week. It's not, and not saying that he doesn't feel the Holy Spirit in him, but it feels fake when you watch a televised show that's recorded, re-recorded, and re-recorded in Spanish.
Well, and then you realize that he has a team of people writing sermons with him.
Right.
That's where I don't know how, and I know that there are pastors, very influential pastors in this region, and I'm not going to name names because we're on the internet, that you all know who have teams that help them write their sermons.
Oh yeah.
I don't know how that's hard for me.
And see, I even think the lectionary is cheating in a way, because you have a year calendar that kind of gives you hints and stuff that you can use scripture-wise.
Sure.
So, when I was doing lay sermon classes, I tried to steer away from the lectionary as much as I could.
I like the lectionary.
I mean, it's not that I don't like it, because it gives you a lot of good stuff. That if you're having trouble finding something,
But it also forces you to discipline
Right.
yourself, I think, to really use the whole Bible.
right?
Because
That's right.
it's supposed to be 80% in 3 years. Like
Right.
if you actually went through it in 3 years, all of it. Yeah. But I hear you. It can be like a real cheat sheet, so to speak.
Well, like when I spoke at Ed's church on Independence Day, the lectionary had nothing to do with our independence at all. It was
Union Chapel.
Right.
Yeah.
So I wanted something that kind of hit home with being dependent on God, because we're independent from tyranny, but we're also dependent on God.
We are independent from tyranny.
Well, technically, by Constitution,
Thank you.
we are.
Technically.
I was
Notice
gonna say,
air
there's
quotes.
No tyranny happening in our.
Yeah, notice air quotes.
Yeah, I got you.
But we are very dependent on God. And that's one thing, we try in the youth to teach the kids that God is the most important thing in our life.
So what would help us help young people under 50 help them God, they see God missing. Well, I don't want to assume that God's missing because God's everywhere. But how can we help them embrace God?
I think the young ones, the teenagers, the young adults, 20, 30-year-old, maybe even 40, I don't know. They are so used to being entertained. Everything is big and flash and, video and Shazam and all that.
They're entitled to it.
I think sometimes the peace and quiet of the church, they think, well, when's the show going to start? We discussed this the other night, or the other morning. My daughter and son-in-law and I talked about this topic, and they both pointed out they're in their 40s and they your age, and they both pointed out that people younger than them are so used to the phone, so used to the video. They want to be entertained. They want something upbeat. My son calls a lot of churches that really capitalize that feel-good churches. And, to me, I understand that. That's what they're used to. But God's presence in a church, to me, is not just His presence in the people around you. When you look at the people in the church, how are they exhibiting God's grace and love and dignity? I mean, really, do they speak to you? I mean, sincerely.
Sure.
Are they really and truly interested in their community? And see, I like to think the church sort of reflects the community it's in.
I think it does, for better or worse.
And see, that bothers me because I look at our church or any church, that tells me that God is not in our community. There's very little. And well, in fact, public school, you can't even refer to Him. And so I can understand why they go and they hear a sermon about something that has nothing to do. Let's say you're young married and you're having financial trouble, or you're having trouble in your marriage, you're having trouble getting along. We all know that when you first marry, there is an adjustment period.
Or you're having a baby.
Oh yeah, and wow. Or your job is threatened. You don't find that discussion in church. Now they're talking about something that has no relevance to you. Right. So see, to me, number one and number two is almost the same. They think church is relevant because God is not real. They don't feel His presence.
I think about this quite often, actually. Every week I have, as a pastor, when I preach, I feel like I have 20 minutes. And sometimes that's really 10 minutes. Like last week we had a baptism. That's a 10-minute moment. But those moments are so few and far between. How do I, as a pastor, in those 20 minutes, help influence people who are going through perhaps, like you said, job concerns, business failure, personal business failure, debt up to their eyeballs? I mean, we know that the debt is serious.
Cost of living.
The expectations to try to keep up with the Joneses. The fact that the media is telling us a whole lot of stuff and trying to figure out what they're saying.
Or your children are going wild and you don't know what to do.
Yeah, your kids are going wild. You're trying to, you and your husband or you and your wife are not having a very good time these days as a couple. That you still have life left in you, but your marriage is on the rocks. How do I as a pastor and how do we as a church help bring forward those realities when we're so isolated? And I don't think our church is any different in this sense is any different than any other congregation. We are finding ourselves isolated by our phones, by our busy lives, by our two jobs that two husband and wife both working full time, trying to keep kids going and doing all the things that they do: softball, baseball, basketball. You see, it just goes like
it never stops.
The to-do list is just way too high. If you get assuming you get 20 minutes, how do you do that? And it's not possible.
I can tell you, last Sunday when I saw you gave us the topics for your sermons at a staff meeting we had for the whole month, I thought, what in the world is he talking about? Gideon's army. I thought that made no sense at all. I thought, oh, here we go again. Number of hairs on Moses' head. But when you said the whole point of using, and this is the beauty of the Bible, here is this man with, was it 30,000? However many it was, and he sent most of them home.
22,000, then he had 10,000, then he had 300.
300. I mean, here he is. And I think, be courageous. Don't give up. I thought that in itself is something that, I mean, here it is almost a week later, and I can remember it. For me, that's something right there. And that it took you all of maybe 5 seconds to say that.
Yeah.
But you don't ever know. Brian and I talk about that. I think sometimes with the youth, because they're small, so they don't talk a lot, so we end up talking a lot. And I think, am I talking too much? But you don't ever know what sticks and what doesn't stick. You know that in teaching school, teaching anything. You don't know. It's called a teachable moment. And see, I think that's what people are missing in the church are those teachable moments.
Well, and I will say that I didn't have, maybe this is just me, but I did actually try to listen when I was a kid, when I was a younger adult and kid. Not so much younger adult. I didn't go to church much in my early 20s, but as a kid and a teenager, I don't remember hardly anything that my preachers were telling me.
I never.
But I do remember people caring about me.
I remember going to church as a time. I can well remember, especially after we married and started having children, and we were both working, and we had parents that were getting elderly, and there was just it was a time, 1 hour during the week, that nobody called my name but God.
Yeah.
Nobody. For me, that was this real. Everybody laughs at me, but God lives in the left-hand corner of the church, and I know that. That to me, he was so real. Because the minister I don't know what he was talking about, but I would catch a word every now and then, and it was time for me to work things out. I don't see a lot of people having that. They don't.
My concern is that what's most important is that we know each other, that we care for each other, that we reach out to each other, and I think that's what we're missing. That's why young people can't see God. Nobody's really, I hate to say it like this, but nobody's really listening to the details of the sermon. But you better preach a good sermon because there's somebody out there that's paying attention.
And taking notes.
There's a teacher, there's some learned person who's paying attention. Yeah, you gotta have a theology that's espoused, and you've got to help teach the scriptures. But ultimately, those people are trying. That's really just setting the tone for what really is important.
When the children were little, and we were all worshiping together, we would have Sunday dinner like we still do. Of course, they were all there and smaller. So here I'm going to be this wonderful father. We would begin discussing the sermon. Well, what do you think about the preacher today?
Yeah.
It was so unreal. Things like
The things
that.
they would
Like,
come out with.
one of them, I didn't like his tie, or they didn't wear
Yeah.
robes in those days, or I didn't think he'd ever shut up. So you don't ever know, but we talked about that too. Out of all of ours, being there, and I think your parents, whoever raises you, has a tremendous influence. For example, my great aunt, who went through the Depression, 2 World Wars, the boll weevil, the whole bit, held on to stuff by her fingernails, never complained, ever. God was alive in her life. She said, have faith. And that faith is something you don't see people talking about an awful lot. Because in today's world, they don't want you to hang on. They want you to take action.
We aren't talking. I don't want to say people because I'm one of them. We aren't talking. We're not
sharing.
We're not engaging conflict. We're not. I mean, as a culture, as a town, there are a lot of things that just don't. They just get brushed aside or put on a shelf.
To talk, you got to trust. There's not a lot of trust in the world today.
Is it? What is it going to take? Is it going to take crises? Is it going to take us just put economically, financially, socially put to our knees? I mean, what is it going to take for us to realize?
What do you think, Brian?
We need God.
Well, a lot of times it takes getting knocked all the way to the ground before we actually step back and say, look, I need God. Because we're taught, and it goes back to what you're taught. Yeah. And I agree with what Ms. Linda said. And I mean, the technology part, I still use a lot of technology even when I'm talking to God, because I reach out to other people through the technology. Mm-hmm. But I agree with her that we sometimes have to step back and just have that quiet time to meditate and think about it. Mm-hmm. And to, let go and let God.
That's right. But,
in the whole, it goes back to being taught. And in Sunday school is where I learned most of my stuff in youth group. Mm-hmm. Because our youth minister at the time was I mean, he was a recovering drug addict. He was a recovering alcoholic. He was, he'd been through a lot of things that he knew was going to attack us when we were coming up. And I mean, when your youth minister rides up on a Harley Davidson and
It kinda
leather
gets your
chaps,
attention.
oh yeah.
Oh, that's kind of nice. Yeah.
I mean, and I was, that was our youth minister when I was growing up. But our Sunday school teacher was this little sweet lady that was probably in her 40s at the time that loved kids. I mean, she just loved kids. And I see that here. We have people that love kids. They teach the kids. They bring it to the kids. Joe does a great job with the youth. It's just we got to get the youth into the church.
Right.
Because if they're not here,
get
they
the
can
parents.
experience it.
And their parents have to be
right.
interested
Right.
as well.
And
And
see,
we have
it's-
to help them find community here.
Right. And if we don't bring them into the church, they can't experience church to see if God's even here or not.
Well, so somebody emailed me who's been visiting the church, and that person asked me, heard the sermon on Sunday, and were inspired by it. And I said, why don't you take a chance? If you have a chance, why don't you sit down and read the book of Ruth and think about courage from the perspective of Ruth, who went with her mother-in-law of all things.
A leap of faith.
I mean, think about I won't go into details except to say, think about a woman who's a widow who walks with her mother-in-law, chooses to follow her mother-in-law. I have a wife who has a mother-in-law, and that's the kind of thing that only God could engender in a person or in a woman. But anyway, the point wasn't that so much as the story of Ruth at this point, but the person was saying, what I said to the person was, we need to help you find community here. And then the question comes, who is going to step up in the church? And that's the question we must always ask. How do we connect these people? Because I think young people not finding God equals, to me, young people not finding community. Because what I remember,
That's right.
what I remember of church, and where I've experienced church, is in authentic community. It's gathering at the table. We do this all the time, symbolically and really at the first Sunday of the month. But in all honesty, it's table faith. Our faith is really centered on a table, and we find real community and therefore God when we actually talk across a table.
And I look back and think, well, when did I find God in church? Why did I know He was there? It was real easy. They sat with me, my parents.
Yeah.
And my mother and father were very plain-spoken people, no great theologians, but their faith was as real as me. I mean, it was something that was real. It wasn't this hypothetical blah, 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 blah. It was, Mama always said, going to church on Sunday gets the week started. I thought, and that's about right.
So church doesn't make sense if you're not finding God in your life.
That's right.
And people are seeking God, and if they come to church and can't therefore find a place to find God, then it's hard to find God. If you're looking and you don't see an expression of God in the community you're in, then it's hard to see God.
I can't imagine going to church and not being moved by the music, the message, the affirmation of faith. Listen to what we say. I mean, the whole thing, doxology, the whole bit,
Right.
to me, just speaks volumes. For somebody, I don't understand how they could not do it.
Well, I have a question. With that, with us repeating it every Sunday, every week, how many times do we get and just do a habit and pattern, and we ourselves don't actually stop and think about what we're saying? It's just a repetitive.
That's right. The order of worship can you can lose God if you don't. I mean, sometimes the order of worship needs to be hiccuped a little bit just to make sure the Holy Spirit's still in charge. But I will say that when I close my eyes and I think about what is organized church to me, what is more importantly, what is valuable, I see I'm standing in the balcony at Canton First UMC, or misbehaving up in the balcony, and I'm looking down and I see my grandfather with his legs crossed next to his brother Lanier, my grandfather Glenn, and his brother Lanier, and behind them is my mother and my dad, and after that service, what immediately in my mind, I'm carried to my grandfather's kitchen table where we would eat, whatever he'd cook, cube steak. It was usually beets, green beans and cube steak. Now that sounds terrible, but that's what we did. We always had beets on the table because my mother, when she was a kid, had some iodine or some iron issues. So we always ate beets, and I like them now, but I hated them then. But it always goes back to my family, like you said. It always goes
That's a
back.
family.
Now I loved all those people in the church, but ultimately my family had to set that tone for where for putting God in the center.
And see, I grew up in a church that only had a preacher once a month. We were on a circuit. So one Sunday you had preaching, and 3 Sundays you had Sunday school. We met in the basement of the church. I guarantee you the most we ever had was maybe 20.
Mm-hmm.
The piano, the person who played the piano, I guess they could play, I don't know. But it's the people there, and I can see Mom and Daddy sitting by me, or me sitting by them, and you didn't misbehave, because I'm telling you, when I was little, I was sure God, my image of God was like my parents. If I misbehaved, they'd get me.
Yeah.
You know, it took me a long time to realize that was not. But their faith again in their God was just as real as anything. And when my mother was dying, one of the last things she said to me, she said, "I'm ready to go. I am ready. They're all waiting for me." And I thought, what a testimony.
Yeah.
There you are, right? That's it right there.
Right.
Resurrection. I know I'm going to be with them.
So just kind of closing up the thought of this, like if young people are going to find God in church, it's going to happen probably not through some profound moment of sermon. It's probably not going to happen when they memorize a scripture verse, though they need to do that, because when they're alone in crises, they need to remember who they are and whose they are. But ultimately, it's, I think, finding God in organized church, especially whether it's Eatonton First UMC or the Baptist Church or Presbyterian
Anywhere.
Church, they're going to have to be connected to one another, and they need those grandparent types, those parent types. They need their mom and dad need to step up, and we need to step up for them. Like, we have to step up for the moms and dads,
Oh, yeah.
because the children will follow. They just get in the back seat and come. I got pulled to church so many times in my youth, and
There's no question about it. You
I was
win.
pulled.
Yeah.
There was a rope on my wrist, and it was like, either I take this arm or you come with me. And so we went. But in hindsight, I realized, as I sit at the breakfast table with my daughters, and we do an upper room devotion, usually every morning. I make a choice every morning. I'll sit there and I'll walk in from the gym, and I'll say, I'll be tired, and I think, I'd just like to go have a cup of coffee and watch the news. But I look at those kids. I got 2 little girls sitting at their kitchen at the breakfast table, and I say, well, this is my one chance.
That's right.
And so I turn around almost every day. It's like the enemy's like, just go watch the news. And I'll go walk over and I'll get my cereal. I'll sit down with them, and we'll do an upper room devotion. Just the 3 of us. It's like, that is church. And my girls are probably not going to see God in church unless we're doing that. I mean that.
You see God in church for the people in the church.
Yeah.
Just speaking to people. I mean, it that's what it is.
Yeah.
And I don't see a lot of that.
No, and in the midst, it's like the pile-on happens. People have a bad life or a bad mistake, and they think they're shamed by it. So shame then breaks in, and like, we won't go to church because I'm ashamed to go to church, or they might not like me across the pews, or
My dad had somebody say, well, they didn't go to church because church was full of hypocrites. And Daddy said, well, don't you think they need to be there?
yeah. I mean, it's a hospital for sinners.
Yeah.
It's not a place for holy people. The Pharisees got nailed by Jesus when they were praying and beating their chest out loud and in public, and Jesus just threw them under the bus because they were doing a complete opposite of what really needed to happen, which is that he said it's a hospital for sinners. It's not.
It's a long comment, but I'm going to paraphrase if Miss Linda don't mind. It's kind of agreeing with what we're saying, that 1 hour is important to get the week started, and the parents have to be the one to initiate making it happen, and quit being so putting importance on football and clubs and organizations instead of church.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's kind of paraphrasing, but it's
Absolutely. There's got to be if there is to be a revival, it is to reprioritize family
That's right.
and God in the center of our families, and to pull other families along with us. Not just go alone. Say, hey, I'm going here. Why don't you come hang out with us? And we'll go get some chicken afterwards. It's just got to be because the chicken afterwards is what everybody's going to remember.
Well, yeah.
But going to church matters, and being and finding God in church matters. But you find Him when you fellowship.
And so that's one thing that, like when we were taught the mentoring, and we called it the manly mentoring, it was, to me, it was meaning the whole church. And what I want us to do is to go out and actually find people, even if it's an older person, a younger person, and get on a level with them where you have to build up a friendship trust with them first.
Yeah.
Because they have to be able to trust you before they can.
That's right.
But show them the love and grace and compassion of God to the younger families, and then they'll show it to their kids, which will bring them back to the church. Because if they see you doing that, I hate to say this, we're a monkey see, monkey do society.
That's right.
No.
If they see us going out showing the grace and mercy of God to the other people in the community,
Right.
and I hate to say this, it's not just our church, it's other churches around. We donate to like PCO, we donate to this one, we donate to this one. We're like, that's our missions, we're done.
Sure.
We don't reach out to the other people in the community a lot and say, look, we see you're, hurting. Mm-hmm. Let's talk.
The other thing is church needs to be fun, and there needs to be joy.
Right.
And hope.
That's right.
It doesn't need to be, oh God, I gotta go back there again.
Well, yeah.
Oh God, I gotta listen to that one again. Oh my, it just needs to be fun. It needs to, not fun for its own sake, but joyous.
So that's why I like the music. The music is, what a friend we have in Jesus.
Yeah.
When we sing that, I can hear Wesley Chapel and all those people.
Singing like birds.
They're all dead.
Singing
no
like birds.
offense,
Yeah.
But when I hear that song, I think of the black churches that had a soul in it,
Oh yeah.
and they get peppy and they get hyped, and they just
I can hear Big Springs United Methodist Church, first church I served as a pastor, singing in that somewhat hilly of Appalachian twang. What? And I get chill bumps because they would sing that song like birds.
And they meant it.
It didn't mean what it means to me. It meant great grandmother, great grandmother. It was cornbread. It was all those things.
Of course, at Wesley Chapel, of course, sometimes people didn't play, so you learned.
Well, you go a cappella, it's even better.
And maybe you just sang the first verse and the refrains on top. But I mean, it's Grit Walker, lady used to play. She used to play "Do Lord" on the upright piano, and kids actually fought to sit by her, and she'd get out there and bang "Do Lord," and they would sing it.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, every one of those children remember that.
me
Everyone.
and David were talking about that because he picked a song I'd never heard last Sunday.
Oh yeah.
So I was looking back through the
Kind of
hymnal.
threw me for a loop. Where
Sorry.
that would come from?
Well,
Sorry
and
about
one of the people that was announcing music gave their own page, so I was flipping through
Yeah,
the
that was
hymnal to
first
find
song.
out,
Yeah.
and that was the first song that, when you laid the hymnal down and it opens up, that was the first song that came to is "Do Lord," and I'm like, oh my gosh. I haven't heard this since I was a kid.
Well, we've run a little bit over, and I hope you guys have enjoyed our time. I just pray that this church and our community and the churches across our nation would find the young among us and bring them along. And hey, it may be like walking into an alien event for some people who don't understand or haven't lived in church. But you know what? It may be that going and taking them for supper or for dinner afterwards, going and getting fried chicken or going and having a hamburger will be the best thing that ever happened to them, and that may be where they find God. So,
That in small group.
and small groups, keeping it going somehow, some way. Go have a good day. I hope God moves in your life to find God and know that God is moving in the church. God bless you.